I'm just washing my mouth out with soap.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining me again for another chat with a grandparent. And this time I'm talking to Ken, who I've known for quite a long time, who's been a brilliant supporter with Bristol Grandparent Support Group and is brilliant in his own area for supporting grandparents as well. We often hear from grandmothers, but it's really good to hear from a granddad because granddads go through similar things. But Ken will tell you in his own words that his story is slightly different. So Ken, would you like to explain how you find yourself needing support, basically?
Yeah, I'd like to, well, first of all, thank you. I would reciprocate in a mutual backslapping. Jane does a fabulous job, and all the support she can get, she thoroughly deserves. And I think a lot of people are grateful for it. My situation is quite interesting because in strict terms, I'm a step-granddad. Now, this is blood relatives, blood relationships is very important to some people. And I've heard the phrase step-grandparent used by other people. Right from the word go in this situation, the one granddaughter I see, her mum has always insisted on just being called granddad. As far as Chloe is concerned, the granddaughter I do see, I'm just granddad. None of this rest of it comes in. I think it comes down to a family are the friends you choose to be your family at times rather than family itself. It's how you are. It's what the relationship is. It's what you bring to the relationship. It's not the name of it. So as far as Chloe's concerned, I'm a granddad. As far as I'm concerned, I'm her granddad. As far as anybody else is concerned, if they've got a problem with that, then that's up to them. So that's with Chloe. She's 12. She's a granddaughter I see all the time. And she's the best thing in my life. And I feel with what I do, I've got a foot in both camps because I'm one of those in a grandparental situation where I'm estranged, but I'm also access. And I really am at both ends of the spectrum. Normally my life, like most people's normal lives, are 10% black, 10% grey, 10% white, and the rest is grey in the middle. In this particular instance, it's the only thing that's involving me where it's either black or white. There is nothing in the middle. I see Chloe as much as I want to. The other three, two of them I've never met. I've never seen photographs. I haven't got a clue. The first one, first 8 months of her life was involved with her completely. Then came the parting of the ways, and since 13th of December 2008, I haven't seen her. As far as I know, she's in Glasgow. That is as much as I know. So it's about how you deal with it from there. Now, how did this come about? Well, this came about because Chloe, her mother, is her only child. And Chloe's mum is a single mum, done a wonderful job, that is still doing a wonderful job. And she has given me the privilege of being in the additional parental role where it's necessary at schooling and things like this. It's her brother, which is the person involved with this. Now, he got involved with this girl, and for about 18 months, everything was fine, allowing for the fact that she was a bit of a loose cannon. She came from Glasgow. Every other word was an F and a blind, which is not in my sphere of life, but that's how some people are. They had a very volatile relationship. We kept it going. When it came to Grace's christening, I paid for it. Val, my wife, she paid for the cake, everything else. We did everything. We took them on holiday. They didn't pay a thing. We put them up, didn't pay a thing. But they kept having arguments between them, and they had a split up, and they didn't have a split up, and we were thinking, really? And so on this particular day, it was about 10 days before Christmas, I had a phone call, and it was from her saying, I've had enough of him. I've kicked him out. Can you come and sort it out? An hour later, I had a phone call from him saying, she's kicked me out. Can you come and sort it out? And their mum turned around and said, oh, for good, his mum, my wife, turned around and said, for goodness sake, they're acting like kids. Can we, we're fed up with all this. So I picked him up, went round to the flat, which was about 10 miles from where I live, walked through the door and picked up Grace as normal. They came in the kitchen, we stood there, and I turned to them and said, look, before we start, can you two stop acting like kids and let's sort this out? And that's all it took. Yeah. She snatched Grace, leaving out the swear words, told I'd never see her again, this, that, something out of that, and that was it. That's the last time I saw her.
Okay.
He decided to do nothing, and then when the lies started to come around. And I would say at this point, I'll add a caveat, there are always two sides to every story. So one always has to add that. So I'll continue with my side of the story. That's when the lies started. It got so bad with the lies that at one point I'd arranged free, as it turned out, there's a fantastic lady called Jane at a local solicitor's called Bisco's. And Jane was very much looking to try and help. And at that time, you could still get free half-hour sessions. Well, she gave me about 3 hours free, including getting a whole load of documents from the courts so he could stop, by which time they'd split up, by the way, the two parents. So stop her going back to Glasgow and taking the child. He refused to turn up, but he told everybody where he lives that I refused to help him. I've got all the emails, I've got the documents. We went to the court and it was too late. Far, far too late. And he tried to lay the blame on me. So to sum it up, we're in the situation because he's a lying little so-and-so who cannot lose face by admitting his wrong. So what's the ramifications of it? Well, when he got married to a different woman, who is the mother of the second and the third grandchild, his mum wasn't there. His sister wasn't there.
Right.
His niece wasn't there. They just weren't invited. Apparently, though, he is such a lovely person that 10 o'clock on his wedding night, put it on Facebook that he wished his mum was there.
Oh, God.
I could have killed him at that point. I don't mind telling you. I don't care who's watching this. I don't care who wants to say anything. I could have killed the little sod there because I saw the look on her face. And then he went there, further down the line and basically said to his mum, you can see Grace if you dump him.
Okay.
And said the same to his sister.
Right.
They chose not to. That was their call.
Mm.
I would say that, let's say, when our time comes to meet our maker, some have religion, some don't. Expectations of, shall we say, things that follow on, 3 become 2. What's the effect been? If you ask Val how many grandchildren she's got, she'll say 4.
Yeah.
If you ask me, I'll say 1. Who's right? Neither of us. Both of us. Whatever your defensive mechanism is, it's yours.
Yes.
Can I stray slightly to explain the difference?
Yeah.
I've nothing to do with the grandparents thing, but I've been working. I do things where I am locally to do with carers, and I was asked the other day about my experience as a carer, and I've actually been a carer since I was 17, apart from 10 years. I was a carer for my mum for 25 years. Then there's been a 10-year gap, and after that, it's with her parents, and then Val's registered disabled. Registered disabled now. And the way I handled my mum's illness was she had a stroke and a brain tumour and an operation, which led to a catastrophic result after that. And in my mind, she died on the operating table. So for 25 years, I was dealing with effectively a glorified hologram. My sister could never understand because it's just a different way of dealing with it. It's a compartmentalisation of it. Very occasionally, if you want, there's a film out called Breathe about polio. It caught me out. It's the first time in 30 years I had a memory of my mum. And the door opened. And that was a difficult 2 hours I had then. So it's a carefully controlled way of dealing with it. So with regards to the other 3, as far as I'm concerned, they don't exist.
Okay.
It's the easiest way for me to deal with it.
Okay.
It doesn't harm anybody. It makes it easier for me just to get on my normal life, which I am. Chloe, if I didn't have Chloe, would I be the same? Probably not. I'm very much a bottles half full person, so having access to Chloe has made all the difference. She is my half a bottle that's full.
Yeah.
Would I be any different without her? Probably.
Yeah.
I can't say I wouldn't be.
No.
Val, of course, has a completely different view.
I was going to ask you that. So how do you support Val? Because clearly, as you say, her view is different. you obviously talk to her about it. So how does she feel about it herself?
We don't actually talk about it anymore because I don't think we need to. I think there's an element. I've been involved because of Val's dad. I've been involved a lot with dementia, and one of the things about if you've had the sadness of being involved with dementia, you will find that the grieving process starts at different points to different people, very often before the person has actually passed away. So I've gone way past my grieving process over the grandkids. And I think Val's gone past her grieving process, unless she's reminded.
Yeah.
So through other family members, her son was told in no uncertain terms not to put any photographs on Facebook that she can see, or anything like that. Been told not to post anything or do anything as a reminder. I hasten to add, this is her mum, this is Val's request. And that way, the management of it is we just get along with Chloe. Now, and of course we're getting older, but we're still we're still not as old as, because, I'm 65, she's not, I won't tell you what age she is, but she'll soon be 60, soon enough, she'll be 60 soon enough. We're still relatively young in some respects, so there's still hopefully plenty of years ahead. Now, where I think it could become a difference is, my view is, I'm actually not looking for a reconciliation. That is not what I want with the 3 grandkids, because I've told Jane, so that Jane knows what I'm going to say. As far as I'm concerned, if I chase it now, it's purely down for my benefit, not theirs. And this is all about the grandchildren's rights and the grandchildren's benefit. Clearly, 2 of them never met me, probably wouldn't have a clue I even exist. And the 3rd one was 8 months old, would have, at my earliest memories when I'm 4. So she'd have no memory. So who's this old balding stranger standing in front of me saying he's this? So what? There will be no connection. Not naturally. Of course there could be, but that would be for very different reasons. So if I chase it, I'm doing it for all the wrong reasons. If they came to my door, what would I say? I haven't got a clue. It's like meeting a stranger for the first time. Can I add, this is my 3rd marriage. Guilty. In my 2nd marriage, there was a stepdaughter.
Yeah.
Who I knew from when she was 1 until suddenly her mum announced she was walking out when she was 11. Right. So I last saw Sian on the 23rd of March. It's funny how you remember these days, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah.
17 years later, I haven't heard a thing. Right. Now, I know through mutual friends that, let's just say, certain comments are made about me that weren't particularly pleasant. That came from her mum. But thankfully, the friends who told me about, the mutual friends at the time who told me about that, also knew the truth. So I didn't have to worry about reputation or anything like that. No. But Sian has completely chosen to totally ignore me, although she'd be nearly 30 odd now. So I have an experience as to why I'm not looking for it and not expecting it. So that's actually what's happened to me from a previous thing in a slightly different relationship, and nevertheless, it's still a parental position.
Okay, so in a way, is it your self-protection?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I know I'm mentally strong. I can say that. I've never had a day's anxiety in my life, as far as I know. Not that I've recognised it. I've sailed through traumas in my life, fatal crashes, divorces, or redundancies. I've always been able to sleep. I'm nothing special. I just have to have a coping mechanism that allows me. It's as simple as that. We're either born with it or we're not. It's very hard to develop. You've either got it or you don't. And God can be quite helpful, and other times a lot of hindrance. Val's the opposite. She would love a reconciliation at some point.
Yeah, that's what I wondered.
I don't open the wounds, and I do call them wounds because they are wounds. Yeah. The fact she missed her son's wedding, she wasn't allowed to go to her son's wedding. I think you have to be a mum to understand that. I will never forgive the little shit for that. Excuse my French. I'm sorry, that's the right word. I will never forgive him for that. And no matter what else happens, I'll never forgive him for that over and above everything else. I'll never forgive him for that.
But that's the effect. That's because you are protecting Val, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, it's not, well, yeah. I'm not quite sure how she. I'm not quite sure she'd agree with that.
Okay.
But in reality, it's no. She's very proud. In reality, yes. But it's also to give her the freedom to make her own mind up. She makes her own mind up over it. If she wanted to see her son, I wouldn't stop her.
No.
It would probably cause a few conversations.
Yeah.
But it's not my role to stop her. She
No.
makes her own decisions.
Sure.
So we're not a couple where we've sat down and I've told her she must be like this. It's been very open. It's been left open. That's why I can say I've got one, she's got four. Now, if you actually ask her direct, she'd love to see the kids again, but not under the circumstances there are now.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there are a lot of parents who are estranged from their adult children who feel the same way too. And you know, I too obviously am not estranged or wasn't estranged from one of my children, but I know how painful that is for many.
Well, that is true, because, sorry to interrupt you, that is true. Because I've got 3 children of my own, and they're not a problem. And Val's got 2 girls who I'm very close to. They're not a problem. It's just 1 out of 6. Only takes 1.
Well, and as I repeatedly keep saying, is that, you know, we can be responsible for our own behaviour, but we can't be responsible for somebody else's behaviour. And
certainly not when they're over 18. Certainly not when they're supposed to be adults. Especially,
yeah.
I was the most naive person you would ever meet. I was as shy as anything, which I know you'll probably find surprising, Jane.
No
I was
comment.
the shyest person you could ever know until my first child was born. I
Okay.
really changed when I was 20. When I was 25 and Rebecca was born, I did half change. It was a classic case of suddenly wake up.
Yeah.
Seriously, that's what it was. And you suddenly wake up and you realise life suddenly got a bit more interesting and a bit more complicated and a bit more responsibility.
Yeah.
You've done half change quick. And I think responsibility, it really comes down to a 5-letter word. Begins with S, ends in Y, with or in the middle. That has caused or created probably more upset than anything you could mention. Probably even wars. He can't say sorry. He can't bring himself to say, oops, I got that wrong.
No.
It does come, and in our case, it honestly comes down to that.
Yeah.
And the fact he can't afford his own stupid head to lose face.
Yeah.
And not that I'm bitter. I just think he's caused so much damage. And the person I know I'll shut up in a second to let you ask a question. It's Chloe who has the biggest burden to carry, because she's not even now totally aware of what's happened.
No.
We've tried to shield. Rightly or wrongly, there are plenty of people say we got that wrong. That's absolutely fine. I say we because it's Melissa's call, she's her mum, but we are there to help her right by her side. Chloe's never met her cousins.
No.
I had that with my parent, with my dad, and his brother fell out over their mum's funeral, and they never spoke for 40 years. So I had 2 cousins. I've met in over 40 odd years. I met one of them twice, and the other one 3 times. And the reason why it was 3 and 2 was because the 3rd time was the other one's funeral.
Right. Okay.
So in 40 years, I only saw cousins twice in my life.
Did that affect you?
Hey, Steph, it's Ken. I'm on a call at the moment. I'm on a Zoom call. Can I call you as soon as I finish, please? Okay. Do you want me to wait till after then? All right. I'll give you a call after 4. Thanks. Sorry about that.
That's all right. I should just like to repeat to anybody who's watching, who doesn't know, I've yet to learn how to edit these films, so there will be all sorts of things like that might well happen. So carry on.
You know what, I was very self-conscious about what I was going to say on that one, just in case.
Quite right too.
Yeah. So where were we? See, typical man can't do 2 things at once.
No, you see, neither can I now. I don't know. You were talking about Chloe and cousins, and that's where we were.
Yeah. So the estrangement is not just the grandparents. It's a lot wider than that.
Yeah.
So one person's upset, one person's misdemeanor, one person's creation of a problem can create a lot of other people get involved. The ripple effect is huge. It can be
Yeah.
huge at times.
Yeah.
I think it's there is, for me, when it comes to dealing with these things, there is no right or wrong way about it. Or sorry, there's obviously a wrong way about it, but everybody's individual. Everybody's different. Everyone has their own defense mechanisms. Everybody has their own approach to life. Everybody has their own way that they can try and cope. And I think with the grandparents we come across, it is the loneliness factor. It is the feeling of being on your own. It is the feeling that nobody will understand. One person couldn't tell her neighbour for 3 years. When she met me and was seen by the neighbour, she just said I was a friend and couldn't bring herself to say what it was all about. And that's how it can affect you. I've known marriages break up. We know, I believe, 3 in 10 years, 3 suicides through people that's come through from. There are bound to be others. We had one horrible story of a lady who suddenly disappeared from coming to groups and never didn't have her address or anything and never replied to her phone number or email. So never know whatever happened to her, but she was estranged from her granddaughter. There was an injunction out against her. Wasn't even allowed to see her, wasn't even allowed to look at her, was basically told to turn the other way if she saw her in the street. That's bad enough. Her garden backed onto the same school and heard her every day and couldn't do anything about it.
Mm.
And we saw over a period of time that she was deteriorating in her mental state.
Yeah.
She couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
Which was awful. As I say, the contact wasn't remained. So we are, I suppose there is an element of fear, being fearful about what's happened to her.
Yeah.
So it affects an awful lot of things. It affects people's confidence. The guilt factor is about, what did I do wrong? Did I do anything wrong? Do I have to compromise? Whose responsibility is it?
Mm.
And I just think, so long as people are able to go to somebody, which is why the group you've got has been, we know from what we've seen on the Facebook messages, just how people have mutually helped each other. And the important thing is no one's had to justify it, no one's had to explain.
Yeah.
No one's had to say, oh, this is, I feel like this, I need to explain to you why I feel like this. In our dementia group, the biggest thing we had to try and help people get away from was the guilt with dementia carers. A number of people say, I feel so guilty because I shouted at him, I feel guilty because this and that. Guilt is absolutely fine. It's perfectly acceptable. It's perfectly normal, but it's also not something to crucify yourself over. It's part of the process.
Mm.
With here, I've always asked a question whenever we've had grandparents come to us to talk to us through the groups or whatever. We've always got round to saying, what have you done anything to make things worse? It's interesting how very few will answer that question.
Mm.
And I think it is an important factor because not every grandparent's a nice person. Not every mother, not every mother and a father are good parents, that's for sure. But not every grandparent is a good person. Not every carer is a good person. I know because my mother-in-law was awful. I can say that. And she wasn't awful because she was a horrible person. She was awful because she couldn't get it. She didn't understand. And she couldn't get into her head that someone with dementia is a completely different ball game to somebody who's just being awkward. And she never, ever grasped that, no matter how hard we tried. But that's a separate issue. So grandparents sometimes have to look at themselves. Grandparents sometimes have to look at themselves and say, did I do anything? Could I have actually? I made that phone call. We're helping one couple who, I think, fortunately, they would admit this. They were on the verge of sending an email at a Christmas. Theirs was a unique situation because the mother of the grandchild actually died. It was their daughter who had an illness from birth, and it caused them in her early 30s. So they were dealing with a son-in-law who then got attached to an other woman who'd never had children. And I think you can see how that creates.
Yeah.
When they met us, it was just after Christmas. And they said they were umming about sending this email. This email would have started a chain of events that would have led to calls.
Yeah.
And all we said was, are you sure? It just simply made that they simply, for the first time, they said they'd spoken to people who understood where this was.
Mm.
And so they said, okay, we'll give it some thought. They didn't send it. They do now have access in a limited, controlled way. And they're prepared to go with it for now.
Mm.
They would never have had that if they'd have sent the email.
No.
And all we did was make them think.
Yeah.
We didn't tell them not to send it.
No.
We didn't tell them what to do.
Sure.
We just said, we understand. Are you sure you want to do this?
Yeah.
And I do think that's how these groups and trying to support people is seek somebody out who has a similar understanding.
Yeah.
And see what they can offer you as a thought.
Yes.
And just see whether it helps you in your circumstance.
So what's your view as far as the call for changes in the law, etc., which you've heard many times, and you and I have obviously discussed. But so how do you think there is a way out of this? Is there an answer within the law?
It's a tricky one because how prescriptive can you be? I think when we were trying to do something, I think just before we'd met, or I think when we were doing it, but before we joined yourselves, we were looking at we were looking at 3 different levels. And in very simple terms, if the custody, if I can use the word custody, or the guardianship of a child comes up for discussion,
Child arrangement.
Pardon?
Child arrangement order is the correct term.
There you go. The first port of call should always be the mother. I don't care what any male says, the first port of call should always be the mother. That for me is the natural order of things in the way nature.
Well done, Ken. That's going to open up a marvellous debate. Thank you so much. Carry on.
I don't give it,
Don't carry on.
The word rhymes with Ross because at the end of the day, it's how I view it, and it's my view. I've made the same comment about when I got married. I've been married 3 times. Each time I was the glorified guest because it was the wife's day, it was the bride's day, and quite rightly so. And so it should have been the bride's day. My 3 kids. Each time I've been a glorified visitor rather than, and the focus has been on the mother who's done all the hard work, for goodness sake, and the child, quite rightly so. And I do believe that should be that it is the male responsibility in that respect to be supportive to the mother. I don't care what anybody says. When it comes to actually giving birth, there is no equivocation about it. So I do think, I lost my train of thought now.
We're talking about the way forward, really.
Yeah, the way forward.
And whether there should be a change in the law, or
I just think that when we're looking at rights, the mother is the first port of call. If the mother is, and I use the word worthy before anybody starts firing arrows, it's just a word for the purpose of this conversation. If the mother is worthy, fine, end it there. If the mother isn't, move on. Next level is the father. If the father is worthy, fine, stop there. And this, of course, is generalizations. If not, it's that 3rd level. That's the bit that's missing, which I believe you do have in America, you do have in France and other countries. And the 3rd bit is about the extended family, which includes grandparents. It's not just grandparents. And in my case, my dad was married twice. My mum was his 2nd wife because his 1st wife died the same week she gave birth to what was my next brother up. So when I was growing up, we had Auntie Wynne. And Auntie Wynne used to come in, look after, do everything. It wasn't until my dad was passed away in 1986 that I suddenly discovered Auntie Wynne was his 1st wife's best friend. There's no relation. It was just a courtesy title.
Yeah.
As far as I was concerned, she was more family than family. So what is extended family? Extended family are the right people. Yeah. So it could be brother, sister, auntie, uncle, grandparent, next door neighbour. It could be anybody. And that's the bit that the law needs to recognise. We do know, I think Channel 4 in Essex had that some years ago about the forced adoptions in the closed courts, the secret courts, that you're not allowed, that you could be jailed if you say you've been appointed one. And they showed this couple who for the first time had won, the first grandparents who'd won. And they basically reported it. in defiance of the law as it is about the secret courts. I think on the basis of, you dare going to touch us, really? Are you really going to take that hit? And they said that they were totally ignored in that time by a social worker with an agenda. Now, my experience of social workers is actually positive.
Yeah.
Over the years, I've come across one who I would willingly put against the wall and shoot, but the other 8 or 9 I found to be very, very helpful over the years. So I have nothing against our social workers. They do a damn difficult job. But in this instance, that family had a very bad social worker who chose to ignore anybody else and went straight to. That's at the time when they were accusing them of having rotas, of having targets for a number of adoptions.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to the law, it's very important that there should automatically be reference made that when a child's guardianship comes up for questioning. And I think you get told one of the most common reasons is usually linked to mental illness or addiction when it comes to parents not being capable. Then the authorities, whoever's dealing with this, it should be in law that they look at this extended family before they do anything else. Whether we use this as a platform to say that there are certain people, certain groupings who are very much against this, it'd be very nice to have that conversation at some stage.
Yeah.
There are obstacles to get this done. So do I think, if you look at the recent conversations about J.K. Rowling, without going into the reasons behind it, there's an example of somebody saying something which is factually true, but because it didn't fit the narrative of a pressure group, the pressure group said, "We're right, you're wrong, shut up, and we're going to shout and shout and shout and make you embarrassed until we get until we get our way." And there are plenty of other examples around that you can see that. What we need is something that basically says, in a nice, quiet, objective, a nice, quiet, objective way, a child's guardianship is required, mother, father, extended family. Whether the members of parliament will eventually accede to that and ignore pressure groups is the important question. Since you and I have been doing this, Jane, obviously you've been doing much more than me, but I've been, doing my little bit in my own area. The number of members of parliament who've expressed an interest in this has grown. The interest in it is there with some members of parliament. People have their opinions as members of parliament. One of our local ones I've got an awful lot of time for. Whether or not they will go the next step and actually start drafting it into. George Freeman, I think, was actually doing that before the 2017 election. I understand it through the MP's office that when he was doing the manifesto, it was something on his to-do list to add to the manifesto was about grandchildren. But of course that got squashed because of the general election, and George Freeman moved on to something else. Yeah. So the spark is there. It's not as if it's something out of the blue, like we all want people to have blue skins and ears like Martians. It's not as if this is strange. It's not as if it's not been a subject that's not been touched on before.
No,
it's
and I said
next stage.
I think the thing is that this last 3 months, particularly whilst we've been going through this lockdown situation, there hasn't been a day that's gone past when actually grandparents haven't been mentioned during press conferences in one way or another, and it keeps being said how important grandparents are to the relationship to grandchildren, etc. So there is a feeling that there is some positivity that can come out of all of this pandemic situation, and it will be interesting to see how it moves forward and whether it is possible to move it forward. I mean, most people know my views about it, but that isn't what these interviews are about. These are about listening to other people's views. And
I think your view and mine are very, very similar. We just happen to have very similar views on how we try and move forward with this. Will they actually take that next step? I think it would depend on that. you're right about the grandparents being mentioned, but it's all been mentioned for the wrong reason in terms of trying to get this. Actually, it's all about grandparents who can't. If you take that painting, that fantastic painting, it got a good reaction when I did post it on my own website page. It's interesting how the view of most people is that they were facing the children as they were walking away. That's where they are. In our case, you're walking away from the children without looking back, without seeing if the children are there. So if you turn that painting round where the people were coming off the train looking at the kids, that's what this was about during the lockdown.
Yeah.
That painting was about us, where they're moving away from the kids.
Yeah.
During lockdown. I think that's the difference.
Yeah, it was an extraordinary painting, and actually it you know, the reasons it was painted were not for the reasons we're talking about, but of course it just fitted brilliantly.
It fitted, yeah, absolutely. The numbers can make a difference. If you think about something else I've got an interest in, which is people who have hard of hearing, it's a huge cohort of people. When you think the average age of people losing their hearing now, it starts at 49. When you think people who are 70 or over, it's 3/4. That's a huge number of people. That's a huge number. And it's starting to really resonate with people that you can't carry on ignoring people with lip reading, sign language, all that sort of thing. Grandchildren, if we take that Daily Mail, I think it was a Daily Mail article, we know the Grandparents Association figure was 1 million. That goes back about 7 or 8 years ago. Yeah. So the 2 million figure by the Daily Mail was probably pretty reasonable. And with today's broken society, exponentially 4 to 5 million grandparents estranged. That's not an unreasonable number. If you think in percentage terms, you've got 66 million and talking 5 million, that's 1/12, which is 8%. So if you go to Wembley Stadium, that means the whole behind one goal are grandparents who are estranged. I did that when I used to do a talk about 1 million kids. You can see the number, you can see the noughts glaze over in people's eyes. I mean, what's that? Is that nine zeros, or is that 10 zeros? Is that what, 6 zeros? If you said that was 10 Wembley stadiums full of people, my goodness, you saw a different reaction, because they could equate to that.
Yeah.
It's the same as the COVID-19. Locally, if you talk 40 million people have passed away, locally, that's Fratton Park, the football ground, filled twice.
Yeah.
If you paint it in those pictures, it suddenly means exactly the same figures, but the perception suddenly changes because they can actually understand it now. You just give a number of 40, you know, if we just say 40,000 people have passed away with COVID-19, I've not known, I asked the dentist today, I've asked other people, I don't know anybody who's had it. No. I don't know anybody who knows anybody directly who's had it.
No. No.
And so it only affects little tiny bits here, but it made it sound as though every other person walking down the road is going to drop dead with it. That's the perception, because you can't really work it out. But if you say it's the equivalent of, in grandchildren's terms, 25 Wembley stadiums, that's a lot of people.
That's extraordinary. That is extraordinary, and it would be really, it would be amazing, wouldn't it, if we could find somebody to do a visual of some sort, a bit like that painting, that would be wonderful to get that, but I don't know whether that's possible. But
I'm no artist at all.
Oh, me neither.
But if you got a stadium, if you got an arena, and in the middle were grandchildren,
yeah,
and those 3/4 were looking at the grandchildren,
yeah,
and that quarter was looking away from the grandchildren, yeah, pictorially that would sum it up for me.
It would, and that's food for thought for me to go away with. I'm gonna bring it to a close.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you so much for your time and your
all trolling is allowed, all trolling is welcome.
There is definitely things that I suspect will get quite different responses, but that's the whole idea of these interviews, and I appreciate the time that people are giving me to talk to me.
Just on that point, I know you want to wrap it up, but just on that point, if people have a problem with anything I've said, that's absolutely fine. That's entirely up to them. But you're never going to get this matter resolved unless people are allowed to differ. People are allowed to disagree. People are not allowed to say, I disagree with you, let's have a cup of coffee and a cuddle and we agree to differ. If you can't say anything without people trying to shoot you, then those people will never see this resolved. It will not be resolved because their own prejudices will create the barriers that will stop it. You have to be as open-minded and as fair as you can possibly be. Was I at fault for anything to do with the estrangement? Don't know, because we've never had an opportunity to explore that. Would I be prepared to accept it? Absolutely, because far from being perfect as I am, no doubt I could have said something slightly differently. No doubt I could have written something slightly differently. No doubt I could have acted quicker on this. No doubt I could have backed off on something or other. So unless you want an honest conversation where you can smile, state something in context, and this is where I find the problem is out of context. For me, saying men are just glorified, if you just take the statement, men are just glorified guests at a wedding, that's different to the explanation I gave before that and after it. Sound bites will create the problems. Context gives you the full story, then you can make your mind up. And if people disagree with anything I said, absolutely fine. They can have my details, they can have a conversation, not a problem at all. I would certainly be very happy for a certain group of people who shall remain nameless, but are usually called feminists. If they want to radically pick up something and have a conversation, feel free.
Yes, and that's a conversation I want to be in on. And you're right, and all of this stuff is about communication and about people being able to communicate openly without fear of saying things that they want to say. Without being offensive to other people, and
absolutely.
And I really appreciate your openness and your honesty, and I look forward to revisiting this conversation. And thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. If this has helped anybody, that's even better.
Thank you.